Hi, welcome to the recording of the Sheep, Lamb and Wool Price Where to From Here webinar. This webinar was presented by Robert Herrmann from Mecardo on the 29th of July 2020. This is clip 3 of 7 and covers lamb and mutton exports and values to China and the Middle East.
Let's have a look at export volumes. They're still very strong. Lamb exports, total lamb exports, you can see the green line there was last year. We had a cracking year. This year has been very good. What's happened in May has been that we've really just run out of numbers to sell, and if you look at the sale yard numbers, they've really collapsed. But the interesting one, I suppose, is lamb exports to China in all of this. So lamb exports to China last year were well above the 5-year average, well above the band, the range that we look at that's sort of normal. And in fact, in some of these months, China was our biggest export destination for sheep and lamb. I think in January this year, they actually were the number one. And the other factor here is that we hear the rhetoric about how China is, bluing with the Australian government. They're arguing with the US and threatening to do all sorts of things. The US has never shipped more soybean to China than what they have in the second quarter of this year. We've never shipped more lamb and beef to China. So while we've got, on the one hand, the political rhetoric, and I guess it's the stories that people want to publish, and no doubt the politicians are playing to a certain audience, the bottom line is that we're seeing exports of our products are still very strong. It's an interesting, and I'm just looking at that chart, lamb exports to China. If you think back, it was about early January where we first started to hear about COVID hitting the Chinese economy, and it really went into a strong lockdown, and that was reflected in exports, and we thought, well, that makes sense. I mean, they came back to the 5-year average. But what's happened since then is that they've bounced up and gone very strongly, and that's supported by a lot of the messages that are coming out of China now, that the economy is getting back on its feet. Manufacturing is getting back. People are getting out and getting back to their normal way of life. I preface that by saying that on the news tonight there was probably a concerning story about a second wave, but at the moment what we're seeing is that demand for lamb export is still very good, and it's despite the COVID-19, it's despite the falling sheep flock numbers, it's despite the drought of last year, and it's mainly driven by China. And if we keep that in mind when we get to wool, it's another factor we need to factor into what's going to happen in the future. There's one market where we have fallen away, and that's the Middle East. The Middle East is a market where we had good presence, but that's fallen away. And the main reason for that is that most of the product that we're shipping in there or flying in there, frozen or chilled, was going in on passenger planes, and it goes in on, so you got the people sitting up the top, and underneath they fill it up with the product that the Middle East countries need, mainly things that they can't produce themselves. So meat was one of those, and those aeroplanes have, the logistics that was supporting not only the passengers was the logistics supporting meat imports, and that's been severely disrupted. We're seeing sheep meat exports are still very strong. We've got product moving from high value to low value markets though, and that's an impact on lamb prices in general. It's more difficult, go back one step. Most of the high value cuts are cuts that end up in restaurants, and we know what's happened to restaurants around the world. So that's a negative, and we saw that in the US where, the demand for burgers went through the roof, but the prime cuts were struggling. Now, again, the fact that we've got this large market in China, and it appears that their economy is getting back quickly up until, the latest information we have, then, people go back to doing what's normal. And we know that the spending capacity and the spending patterns of people after a shutdown are quite strong. So we're expecting that demand to stick. Now, this chart just looks at most recent lamb exports to China in thousands of tonnes. The other one was looking at values, and you can see that the lamb exports in the last 2 years, so the two green lines, have been getting steadily stronger. And this year, the orange bars is showing that February was a bit of a slack month, but we've been very strong since. And that's despite the fact that, our numbers have been low. So China is clearly being a strong driver of our prices. Mutton's a little bit different story. Mutton has struggled with volume, but we think there's nothing we can do about that. We just don't have the sheep to slaughter now. If you look back to last year and look at August, September, October, November, we had big numbers way above the 5-year average of mutton exports into China. That was still the spin-off after the drought, where we were still in that slaughter stage of slaughtering ewes and adult sheep. And at the time, the prices held up really well at that time as well, which was mainly, again, a China story. And I know it sounds China, 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 but the reality was that when we were slaughtering a whole heap of, whether they were cows or ewes, the market was absorbing them, and China was able to be the supporting factor underneath all of that.
Thank you for watching this short clip. For more information, please visit www.leadingsheep.com.au.